we'll begin, and how we'll begin is I would love for the panelists to just quickly go down the line to briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your relationship to the Grand Rapids Public Schools. And then really importantly, because people often forget, you have to tell us what years you were in GRPS. So maybe beginning with Raul.
Hello, my name is Raul Isasi. Can you hear me okay? So my relationship with GRPS is an extensive one. I started kindergarten, so I went to school in the 60s at Jefferson Elementary School, the old Jefferson, which they used to call the castle. It was torn down probably in the 70s. And I also attended Vandenberg Elementary, which is now, I think, a charter school, Discovery Elementary, I'm not sure. And so 2 years there, but my parents insisted I attend Catholic school, so I did attend St. Andrew's Grade School and then attended Catholic Central. I would have gone to Union High School right when in the 70s. And I lived on the southwest side of Grand Rapids near Pleasant and Division. And there was no way I was going to the west side at that time. So I made my choice. I wanted to attend Central High School, but I was not in the district. And my parents said, no, your cousins go there. That's not a good idea. But my children attended Alger Elementary, kindergarten through 6th grade. And my granddaughter is currently attending Southwest, the dual immersion school, which is the old Franklin Elementary. She's a kindergartner. I also was a teacher at Burton Elementary and Burton Junior High School. Started in 1977. I worked with Upward Bound, so I worked with as a counselor at Creston and Union High School when Grand Rapids was still connected to Grand Rapids Community College. Then became principal at Buchanan Elementary. I was principal, probably my administrative career started in 1988 through 2010, but I was at Cesar Chavez, which used to be Hall Elementary. Went to Westwood Middle School as a middle school principal and wrapped up at Adelante, which is an alternative school in the Black Hills area, the former, what school am I talking about? Kent Hills, or no, I'm sorry, Kensington Elementary.
Can everybody hear me okay? No? Can you hear me? Oh, well, thank you. My name is Jermar Sterling. Born and raised here in our city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I attended Grand Rapids Public Schools special education system, K through 12. I started off in elementary KEC, Kent Education Center back in the early 90s. And I worked my way through the special education system up to the early 2000s at Grand Rapids Central High School. In between time, I was given a chance for, as you call it, regular education at Renaissance Montessori Center, which was an off-branch of Burton Middle School at the time. Being a product of my environment, growing up in the Southeast Side neighborhood, I dropped out of school, but able to go back and retain my GED. And now I currently advocate for students such as me who are at risk and misunderstood. And so sometimes I become that liaison between those in-home issues and those hard issues dealing with the education system with GRPS.
Hi, everyone. My name is Betsaida or Saida. I attended Grand Rapids Public Schools in like 4th grade. So that was before 2014, because that's what I remember. And then I used to go to Camp Hall. It's not around anymore. For elementary, I did middle school at MLK Leadership School. It was, I stayed by the Southeast Side, so that was my neighborhood school at the time. And then I went over to City Middle High School for my freshman to my junior year. And then I switched over to Innovation Central my senior year to take advantage of some of their like dual enrollment opportunities and just to experience sort of like a bigger school, get to know more students. And now currently my siblings still go to Grand Rapids Public Schools. I graduated from GRPS in 2017, went to Ann Arbor and did undergrad over there at U of M. And then I just came back to Grand Rapids. It was like after the pandemic was kind of settling in a little bit more. And I was always really passionate about like what could happen and what sort of community space could our public schools be. And sort of how can we enable sort of that community, thinking about when I was younger, about our school stores and sort of these other opportunities, but also really passionate about how do we bring young folks into the know especially, that they have that lived experiences, those talents, those ideas, those challenges. And so now I organize with Urban Core Collective, with our education justice team, doing a lot of really critical, important work and really collaborating with our parents, our students, and our families. And that's just really important to me still because just seeing everything going on with public education, but also I think it's really critical to work with young folks and really build that today and tomorrow together. And so really excited to be here and also learn some of my own history because I feel I never really got to learn GRPS history, and that's really important. I think a lot of people are interested in local history more than we give it credit.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carmen Acevedo Hernandez. I am a first-generation immigrant. I came to Grand Rapids about 3 years ago. My first school was Ottawa Hills High School in 9th grade. My mom transferred me to City High Middle School, and I have made it to my junior year. So I'm currently in my junior year.
Hello, test. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Siguenza, and I'm currently attending Wyoming High School. I have not attended GRPS, but I have siblings, such as my little sister, who has been going to City High School for 3 years, and as well as my nephew, who has been attending Southwest Elementary.
Thank you. Okay. So now what we'll do is I would love for you to share with us one of the most significant memories you have as a student or employee at GRPS, and why was this experience significant to you? And I don't think we need to go down the line. I think whoever wants to go, but we'll just, for the audience, keep in mind, right, the period in which, the panelist is speaking from.
Well, one of my significant memories was in elementary, back in second grade elementary. It was called KC Oakley, and it was room number 2. And in that classroom, we were taught our history. So, back then you would stand and you would say, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America." Those of you of age understand when you come in from school, you got to say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And so in doing so, we had a teacher named Ms. Deborah Pryor Baird. And so she believed in also the Black National Anthem with James Weldon Johnson. And so not only did she teach us about the Black National Anthem, but it was okay to accept our history, but yet learn our culture, but yet other people's culture to be embraced and things of that nature. So that stuck out to me because I never experienced that at other schools, high schools, middle schools that I went to. We weren't able to express Pledge Allegiance anymore. We weren't able to express the Black National Anthem anymore without being considered as racist because we're trying to learn our culture within our schools. And so we were taught we were taught to not just embrace our own, but to also learn about other cultures and things of that nature also, such as Kwanzaa and things of that nature. So I believe we had equipped teachers who had that certain balance to teach between history and education at the time. So that's what stuck out to me back when I was going to school.
And are you saying that was a kind of like a unique experience in second grade, or was that carried on?
It was a very unique experience in second grade because even before second grade, I was never taught anything about culture. I came from a community where it was just violence and things of that nature, but how to love yourself and the sacrifices that ancestors was made, it made me think different when I went back home. And to begin to ask questions and challenge my parents and grandparents to where we can have those open conversations and things of that nature. And so I don't see kids coming home having those open conversations in today's. So I don't know what's really being taught in schools dealing with those type of historical events and things of that nature.
Last year I experienced something. I'm related to Grand Rapids Public Schools and I'm related to my own school. So I have a little nephew who was previously attending Southwest Elementary. He was transferred to Wyoming's Parkview Elementary last month. And I found, so he has ADHD. He's 6 years old. He has ADHD and he's also on the spectrum. And after talking to my stepbrother, who was his father, I found out that he wasn't being treated right, essentially, that his teachers were not giving him the things he needed to succeed. You know, they really just let him be in the corner and they pushed him off the side and let him do his own thing, which is like, it's just very insulting. It's like, what the heck, you know? And relating to my own experience, I found out that my own elementaries had a lack of teachers, a shortage of teachers. That we didn't have a music class at our elementary, and both things sparked something in me. This passion for wanting to create change and wanting to create these equitable opportunities for all students, regardless if they're in elementary or high school or middle school. It really is just like, I know I have the power to make that change, and it really just flamed my passion for me.
I think that for me, some of my most memorable experiences with Grand Rapids Public Schools was being able to be more active within like my community. When I switched over to Innovation Central and I did dual enrollment in GRCC, it was really refreshing to have that trust from my school and be able to walk over to the other building and get to learn sort of about my local community college, especially as a first generation college student myself. And being able to explore and connect in that deeper way. And I felt similar when I used to go to MLK middle school. I really appreciated being able to like walk over to my friend's house that was like 3 blocks down and walking together towards like our middle school and kind of getting to see our neighborhood more, seeing what's happened, and also beginning to question sort of, because I lived on the southeast side by like Hall and Eastern, and so that walk from, you know, when you start going from that area towards even Wealthy Street, starting to question sort of that drastic change. And I think that's also when I was starting to learn more about gentrification as well, and sort of these construction companies and the possibilities that communities could and needed to be asked for consent and needed to be more active when these changes were happening without them, but really impacting them firsthand. And so I think that really brought forward like how important it is for people to see how connected our schools are being impacted with our communities and sort of those deeper level relationships as well. But also acknowledging like, to some extent, my school experience did serve to help me kind of think about that by providing these additional opportunities. But maybe even question more, like, how do we continue to push that forward to experience that even more in our schools?
So what were these additional opportunities that you were able to understand gentrification? Was it like in a particular class or was it extracurricular?
I think it was just walking around my neighborhood.
So it wasn't
Yes.
anything formally being taught in school.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say, well, with Innovation Central, because if you've never been there before, it's kind of across from GRCC. So we would walk to that building to be able to go into those classrooms and learn with other people in the actual classroom setting. And so that opportunity for dual enrollment, especially as it was very close to my school, was great. And they would also excuse us. So our schedule was built out to kind of have that. I think for MLK was more just the beauty of like a neighborhood school for me, because I was able to walk and have friends that were close and kind of get over there.
Okay, my story's a little different. So I went to Hall Elementary, which is now Cesar Chavez, started in 1988, so just to give you that frame of reference. And there were challenges in the neighborhood. My grandparents lived there in that neighborhood. I grew up close to that neighborhood. And I wanted to be a bilingual teacher. I went to Grand Valley. I was elementary certified. And one thing we had at our school was a building improvement team. There was a lot of discussion about how we needed to improve literacy. They had just opened the Madison Square Library, and I was driving to work one day, and I said, why can't we have a library on the southwest side of town? And so our school improvement team, we worked with partners. Schools had a lot of partners at the time. And so we were able to, with the help of a lot of people, turn the neighborhood association office into the library. So there was funding from various sources and foundations. And so probably the biggest accomplishment was that we were able to have a library, because we said if students are going to be literate, they need access to books, to newspapers, to materials. It was before the internet, so we didn't have that. We had a very small library at the school that had a very old collection of books. And so that's one thing that I think was a highlight. It was interesting because At the time, there were low expectations from some teachers for some of the students. Yet when I go back and see the graduates, we have students that left Hall Elementary. One student earned a doctorate at Columbia, others went on and earned master's degrees and finished college. And so that was something that I also remember from being an elementary student. I went in 4th grade to Vandenberg, and my teacher often told me I did well in school. But when I got my report card, everything was marked as satisfactory. And so I realized right away that expectations were different for me in a public school as a person of color versus the Catholic school, where I was often told that I was going to excel. And that's when I decided I was going to be a teacher. And so it was just something that I had to deal with at the time and didn't really know why that happened. You know, I never talked to the teacher about it, but that's my story.
I would say my moment is not just a single moment, but a constant moment of realization that there are so many different people, so many different cultures, so many different like ethnicities and like backgrounds that you can like live through just by going through school. I have friends from many like backgrounds, from many like cultures, and they tell me their stories, and I'm just sitting there fascinated by how GRPS can open your doors to like just like a new world, like open your eyes to see new people, to meet new cultures, to learn a new language, to meet like new opportunities, because this is a big opportunity, and I got it thanks to GRPS and just result. And like I think it's just realizing that not everything has to be this big, just a gray circle, and it can be anything I want it to be, and I can shape it to my way. I think that's like my big moment in GRPS.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that most significant memory. And if you feel that you have any more significant memories, feel free to share. Right now, I think I'm going to try to kind of facilitate a discussion among the younger generation and the older generation and kind of speak to one another. And so I'm curious, for our current high school students or recent graduates, how do you imagine school was decades ago? And do you think it was different or the same? And then it would be very interesting to hear from the older generation if they're on the mark or not.
I have 2 words, and that'd be dull and unfair. I feel like today's schools are much more diverse, especially my own school, which is ranked number 14th in diversity. I would not go to school decades ago. I don't think I would survive there because of laws, obviously. And the people surround me today, I want to go off what Carmen said, was I have so many friends from different cultures all around the world. And it is generally fascinating to me that I'm able to speak with these people and to just be friends with them. It's quite amazing.
So in other words, you're saying that you're imagining that in the past it wasn't as diverse.
Yep.
Okay, so that's your hypothesis.
It was
okay.
not as diverse, not
Okay.
nearly as diverse. And I feel like back then the world was not made for us. You know.
Okay. Oh, so the school was actually not very made for a diverse population.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Great.
So you said, do you think it was because of the language barrier, or when you say you feel like the school was made for you, why do you feel as if they wasn't made for you?
I personally have experienced probably not as much racism as people have them back then, but I feel like the levels of ignorance would just be extreme compared to today, you know?
Right. So you feel today's generation is not more open to understanding where you're coming from. They just shut it down, more bullies or something?
Yeah, I feel like today there's a lot more empathy. There's a lot more openness, mainly due to the publication of stuff like that, like social media.
Okay. Okay. I was just trying to get understanding on that because I grew up at Central High School, and in Central High School it was very diverse, and so you had different languages. At the time, we was just learning what they would call Spanish, and then it went from Latino because they didn't know the word to use without being trying to be bold towards you, Latino community. And so I believe you guys got advantage because of the technology in today's society. So y'all learning faster, y'all learning quicker to where you got all this computers that help you guys cheat on your homework. Now you can take a phone and cheat on your homework if you want to. And so I believe now you guys got more downtime because we had more after school programs to where we didn't have as much downtime as you guys got now. So it was more of a teacher parent type thing. So it was more communication between teachers and parents. If you missed the bus or if you got left behind on school or if you got bullied for something, at least the communication was a letter or something, and you bring the letter signed back. At least that was a form of communication. And so I feel for you guys because there's a lack of communication between parents and teachers and principals and teachers and things of that nature. So I kind of feel bad for that gap between you guys that I feel today's need to be filled. So.
Even through my own family, I've heard that there's often a lack of transparency between teachers and parents. I like to point that out. Yeah, it was good. That was good.
So the 60s were different. Teachers had an hour for lunch, so we walked home for lunch and came back. They didn't go out for recess. They had safeties outside. It was just very different. Teachers still paddled kids in elementary school. So if you were late, you got a whack across the behind with a paddle. In the later grades, you were kept after school, probably unsupervised. They just say you're staying after school. Teacher wouldn't be there. They just expected that you would be there. And when it was time for you to go, you went. So yeah, there were some differences. But yeah, I went to a Catholic school and I wanted to go to Central because that's where I felt like I belonged because there were people that looked like me. At Catholic Central, I felt invisible. I felt like I didn't belong there. No one treated me bad. But I just knew that everybody saw differences. People said, why do you wear your hair that way? Why are you dressed like that? So I stood out, obviously, to people where I was just being who I needed to be. And I knew that if I'd gone to a school like Central, I would have not had those kind of feelings.
How I imagine was before. I have a hard time with this question because I'm like, well, I think we don't really get we don't get the opportunity to analyze our roles as students, our environments in our schools. And I didn't even learn about how public education was funded besides assuming the government. But until I was a lot older and sort of the roles that we play, I feel like students aren't, I think students aren't there isn't a space for them to be active personas in their narratives as students. And so I think that's why I have a hard time. It's because I feel like I wasn't really taught much about GRPS history or public education history or students' history until I was a lot older by design. But I think the way that I imagine it too, because I graduated in 2017, so it's it's quite some time since I've been in high school. But the way that I imagine even before me is sort of a lot more community centric. I think at MLK when I was in middle school, they had this program where if parents volunteered their hours and times and they would offer sort of gifts for people's families and also just trying to make that barrier, lessen that barrier during the Christmas times or other holidays. And I really like that. Or even just thinking about taking the bus, I used to have to see other people on there too, taking the city bus to Innovation Central and to even City Middle High School. And so I imagine to me that it was a little bit more leaning into sort of some of that communication. And also I wonder, was there sort of students that were saying and seeing what we're seeing come up again, which is that student voice and the need for students to have more of that shared leadership and decision making in their schools. And I feel like that was in my history and I got to learn it recently, but it's nothing that I've really heard about when I was growing up, but I assume it's somewhere in there. There's just a need to bring it forward and to know that what we're doing now still goes back into what we've seen through student leadership. And I also assume that it was, I don't know, with technology, I'm sure it was different. iPods were coming out when I was in middle school and elementary. So I don't know what it was like on that end.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, and so then maybe Raul and Jermar, you can respond to this. And I hope I captured it right. But what I'm hearing from the younger generation is what you're imagining what GRPS was like before you all came onto the scene, is that it was more homogenous. So that's a great question to think about historically. Was GRPS less diverse and more homogenous in schools? Was it less culturally responsive is what I'm hearing about for some people, how you're imagining it. But nevertheless, was it community centric though? Was it like, your school was really at the heart of the community, which I'm hearing from the younger generation that might not necessarily be the case, given that we have school choice and all of that, and you have to travel to your schools and whatnot. And so maybe just they're imagining that schools were like this. So was it or was it not?
Well, coming up back in the early 90s and 2000s, school was a big deal. Like, we was territorial when it came to the schools. So you had Central, you had Ottawa, you had Crescent. I was in Central Realm. And so we was very competitive in sports. If we seen you at a skating ring. So I believe it was more community driven. We stayed in that knit thing because we wanted to see if we can outdo Ottawa in education or football, since they had us in fashion already because of sectors and neighborhoods that you lived in. And so we was we were separated based on a poverty level. So if you went to Central, you was considered more of a less than at the time, things of that nature. So we was more adamant on proving them wrong, whether it's education, sports, since they had us on the money and the financial gang. So I believe it was more community driven. We was very territorial when it came to high school and middle school.
So I'll share an example. So city school, so I was at Hall Elementary in the late 80s, early 90s. So they had the zoo school for sixth graders. They had city high school. So they would ask us to recommend students, but you had to have certain test scores. You had to have a recommendation from the counselor. There were only white students at city for a long time. And when students of color went, they would return and they just would say, they would say, well, they didn't make the grade. It wasn't that they didn't make the grade. They were academically prepared, but they weren't really welcome there. They didn't feel like they belonged there. They stood out. And so they said, why in the hell am I here? I need to go back to my own community where everybody, it's going to lift me up and help me accomplish my learning goals. So, that was sad because I would get pressure. They said, you're not nominating students. You're not sending us any students. And I said, they don't want to go. They keep coming back. So there is one group that finally transitioned. And so I think they started to change some of the things. They eliminated some of the requirements they had. They went on recommendations. And so I do have a student from Hall, and she went, and she just said it was a different experience. But she said she was able to stay along with someone else. But we sent students in pairs, so they at least would have a peer that they could be with, because there wasn't really a cohort there for students of color until much later. So you're very fortunate if you go to Sun City now, because it didn't used to be like it is now. Not at all.
So what I imagine GRPS was back then, I do believe it was diverse, but I do not believe that the administration or the officers were welcoming to this diversity that was presented. And as as you said, city is now diverse, but it still feels like you are not welcomed because the way they teach is not for you, it's for them. So they just I believe that it was like that back then, but more difficult for students of color to get into certain schools, to get into certain colleges, to get certain grades in certain schools, or to get even certain recommendations because they were troubled, or they were too loud, or they were just too noisy, too dirty. I've heard that a lot, and it was hard for me to get used to city because I didn't have anybody. And most of my friends now are white, but I still have my Latino friends. I have some other Black friends, which there are not a lot of Black people in my grade, and in higher grades either. You only see mostly Asians and white people, which is really disturbing in a way. I found a lot of like the Latinos there do not want to be there anymore. They just like want to finish school and get out of there.
So in the diversity word, we say you're invited to the party, but you're not asked to dance.
I think like the sense of belonging that students need in their community and sort of that, again, I think like you speak to something that I feel like even when I was at City, I saw like sort of the way that you would see people sitting at their lunch tables, and who was sitting with who, and you can kind of count, and I already knew like who the list of like students of color were in your grade because it was very small. But I think for me, like something that I'm seeing now that I wish I would have had then too, would sort of, you're seeing a lot of these students, especially these like students of color, coming together and bringing forward their identities and what they need in our schools. And those schools, although it is difficult, I think of sort of like the planning that my sister, who graduated in I think she graduated in oh my gosh, like 2 years ago from City Middle High, and just hearing sort of the process of even putting together like a Hispanic Heritage Month celebration and that sort of like supports. I think there's a lot of like need for proactiveness for a lot of these like students that have additional needs. When I was there, and as again like a first-gen college student, there wasn't sort of an offer of introduction to how the college process works, but there was an assumption that you were to go there, and there was an assumption that if you didn't apply and you didn't work for it, then it must have meant that you didn't want to do it. And so I think the infrastructure for support and also the accountability for racism or for other sort of phobias that were happening wasn't present either. And I think although we still see the visibility of different students and identities, the infrastructure to maintain them there isn't present. And I think I think about sort of my sister who graduated telling me about her friend who was a Black student and how his grades weren't 100% there, but he still wanted to be in the space. But the guidance counselor ended up kind of, instead of providing infrastructures of support and trying to imagine, what would it be like to keep him there and continue his education, it's often like, start looking at other schools in the district. And I think that brings up a even bigger sort of like concern, sort of how do we have this district with a multitude of different theme schools and neighborhood schools and other schools, and the process is to out them into these other schools, rather than keep them in these schools that people promote and elevate a lot. And I also think about my own experience, like transferring to Innovation Central. A lot of the narratives around it was that it was a bad school, and if it wasn't City or other schools, Ottawa and Union were like not good alternatives. And that was just so wrong to me, because when I went over there, I had a greater sense of belonging. I saw more students that looked like me. I got to connect with like new people, and I actually really appreciated sort of like the diversity of paths that they offered, still college, but also like trades and other things as well. So I think that's one of my concerns, is like this district being so divisible still at the same time.
One thing I thought of is if you did not speak English, so right away the child study team would bring you to the team for discussion to probably recommend you for special education testing. And I can remember I was a bilingual teacher, and so there would always be students that didn't know English, or borderline kids. They weren't in a program, but it's like, we don't know what to do with this student. They don't read. The schools tended to have tracking, and so Title I students, many students of poverty, were put in basic kind of courses. And even though we were there with neighborhood kids, the idea was to keep students separated, because sometimes the teacher said, well, the students of color, they're louder, they disrupt class, they don't do their work, they come late. And there was really no kind of training on coming up with different pedagogies that teachers could use that would lift up all students and see the brilliance that all students bring to school from their communities, from their families, from their grandparents. Like Jermar was saying, there's different things they bring to school, maybe not the academic preparation, the way that the mostly white middle-class teaching force was hoping to see. It was, it's just very interesting to see that, because it was happening And if somebody wanted you out, they would find a way to get you recommended for alternative education. So if I had a student I had a challenge with, I would talk to my teaching colleague. You write them up, I'll write them up, somebody else will write them up, then we have evidence to exclude the students. So a lot of it was excluding students. Let's get them into the center special ed programs. Let's get them into alternative education. And even before that time, students would just leave school. You know, the dropout rate was higher in the 50s where students just didn't finish school.
So let me just jump in here because we actually have 15 minutes before we open up questions to the audience. But I think what's so special, and thanks to Nora, about having an intergenerational panel here is because we can use these memories to somehow, figure out, even right now, so how has GRPS evolved? Has it evolved at all? Has it changed? Using these memories, right? Like we can try to think about what has stayed the same and what has changed. And from what I'm hearing, a couple of things, and so maybe, the panelists, if you can speak on this, is a couple of things that I'm hearing is, it seems like in GRPS, there are certain schools that have stigmas attached to the schools. And I'm wondering how that has changed or stayed the same over time. I'm hearing that there's some kind of stratification and hierarchy in the system, right? And where did that begin? Has it stayed the same? Has it changed? Language, how do we treat students who come into the system who don't speak English? I'm wondering how that may or may not have changed over time. And also going back to Mike's, your most significant experience with the student with ADHD, special education. Jermar was in the special education alternative schooling system in GRPS. How are we treating special education students over time? Has it changed? Has it evolved? So those are some of the things that I'm hearing from these memories, and so wondering what your thoughts are, especially for the older generation where you have time on your side and you've seen things in the district. But Raul too, I mean, from student to administrator.
I want to talk about my school's English and Spanish first program, and then I want some more clarification on how they treated students who spoke Spanish first or any other language than English. So within my own school, we have courses for people who speak Spanish as their native language and as their only language, really, and we integrate them with so and so on level classes. So we have ESL. Algebra 1, ESL English, and then they'll group them together with people who speak English natively. So there's not this separation, but there's integration. And even through my friends who don't speak Spanish, they some of them have told me they've learned Spanish through these ESL, friends. And it's quite amazing. But for clarification, they would purposely separate his kids just because of that. Or they would other them, is what I'm hearing, right?
So I was just thinking about, so when I look at the schools in general, when I left GRPS in 2010, I believe there are some truly amazing teachers in GRPS that love their students, that work tirelessly to help them reach their learning goals. They've acquired new teaching strategies, pedagogies, where they focus on the students' culture, their communities, their values, their religion. They really get to know them. They step into their shoes. If a student's late habitually, the student will say, I'm late because my mother makes me walk my brothers and sisters to school, and I can't come to school until I make sure they get dropped off because my parents leave for work at 5 a.m. And so there's individuals like that. I know academically we were able to make some gains at Westwood, but it did really involve having to take a look at our data and to really identify the groups that were not achieving and really saying, we keep doing some of these things, but if they're not working, then, we need to stop doing them and come up with different things. And so those are the challenges with a veteran teaching population. It was always like, why do we have to do different things? You know, I went to school and this is what teachers did and I turned out okay. And we say, well, the world was different back then. The world has changed a lot. And so, you know, teaching is hard for everybody. Everyone in whatever school you're at faces challenges. But I do think that there have been some changes made in GRPS that are favorable.
I believe what has changed is that back when I was coming up in school, you had teachers who not only knew how to talk, but they knew how to deal with certain behavior issues. And so with a lot of young men and women who I advocate for and take on the role of mentoring, I'm always hearing that the teacher ain't understanding me. In today's society, the teacher is not taught to understand you. The teacher is taught to teach the curriculum. And so I believe that we don't have teachers equipped enough to not only deal with the behavior issues and the curriculum, but how to effectively communicate. Even when those teachers are getting frustrated, who do they lean on to become their outlet when they're dealing with at-risk students who are often sometimes in control of their own education and when they can come to school and when they don't come to school. And so it was more of a collective effort in what you call truancy. If your child not showing up, parents was held more accountable. If your child not showing up for school, which made them make their child come to school other than just on count days and things of that nature. Just to get funding or whatever hidden agenda that is behind account days and things of that nature. That's the only time that those parents was getting blew up on the phones, close account days and things of that nature. So I just believe teachers are underfunded and need to get paid more in a sense of just in the behavior issues alone in today's generation.
I feel like you bring forward like a really important stuff, which is sort of what are the standards and strengths and sort of like what is a history of public education? What was it created to serve? And what is it actually, what is sort of, I think now more than ever, like what are the opportunities to reimagine and rethink about how our schools look like, how they feel, and how they connect, continue to connect parents, students, and families. And when I think of sort of like the count days, the funding formulas that kind of lead to those constraints, the curriculum, I'm also kind of thinking like at the local level, how do we get creative and still push for our communities to be such a critical part of that? And so, what does that look like by bringing parents and students? And I hear it also lived experiences weren't that valued, but how do we bring students and parents and teachers' lived experience and facilitate that sort of shared leadership in our schools and really collectively make these decisions instead of having just a few folks decide and not really having them present in our schools every single day. I think that something that I think that's really beautiful about working with Carmen, Michael, and a lot of our other students, it's students across the city of Grand Rapids are coming together because they care about the space of school, but more importantly, they know that there's a student voice and a student community that needs to come to life. And it's all in the same interest of like, how do we shape our schools collectively and learn how to do that at a younger age where we're spending 17 years of our life rather than waiting to shape sort of these systems or these policies or these experiences when we're older. And a lot of these students have the knowledge, they have the wisdom, the creativity, they know what's working with other students. Like those peer-to-peer led conversations are so critical. And I'm 25, but like, it's so different when I have a conversation with someone who's in high school versus high schoolers having conversations with high schoolers. And so I think that so many of the opportunities, what are the tools, the resources in the space to support that? And then how do we want to reimagine our relationships with each other? Sort of, when I was in school, a lot of our relationships were competitive, especially at City Middle High. They were really divisive. And that also comes through external factors, like what's happening with politics, what's happening in our communities. And so I think that SAL is a space to kind of, I'm seeing students still come together and change that. And we've seen that happen at South High with the mustache walkout. We've seen that happen in the history of Grand Rapids and GRPS. And I think that I'm seeing a lot of folks continue to go back to that autonomy over their learning spaces, their spaces where they're experiencing these different just growth as well as human beings. And so I think that continues to show up. And even if that's conversations like, we're experiencing this sort of othering at City Middle High, you're still talking about something that's inherent within that system that was designed to be in there. And how do we equip students to then, work and be able to like change it? Also acknowledging that decision makers need to be on board for this. And I think that something that I hear is like, we all want to see our public schools be spaces where students and families and teachers can thrive. And how are we going to kind of go through that together? And what are the values that are kind of guiding some of that work that we're doing?
I just want to add that at the time when I was in GRPS, I didn't have the skills or the words to have difficult conversations with teachers, with families that had some concern with some students in school. I didn't know how to disrupt the white supremacy or the white middle class way of teaching that most teacher preparation programs use when preparing teachers. I kind of knew, being a person of color, that some of the things that I did in the classroom, other teachers didn't do, but that was just part of, those were my values, my beliefs, my desire to see all my students succeed. And so I think we're beginning to have some of those conversations now, but they're difficult ones. They're hard ones to have, and you need experience in order to have them, because right away when you start the topic, people they shut down. They say, why are we bringing this up? Why are we talking about race? I don't like this. This isn't good. This is creating more problems. But if we don't understand our history and if we can't learn to talk about it in a civil way, then the change probably is not going to happen.
All right. Well, final question before the audience has the floor. So on a lighter note, if you could, is there a GRPS related memory that still makes you chuckle or laugh today?
Here's some chuckles in the audience. They came up with a quick one.
I would just say working with middle school students, I was certified in elementary, and when I was asked to go to middle school, my colleagues said, don't do it, don't go to secondary. But adolescents, they make you laugh every day. The things they do, they just think you don't know what they're doing. And there's just a lot of joy that you get working with students at all levels. But that was an especially interesting level because they're going through so many changes. They're trying to make sense of the world. Their bodies are changing, just how, they navigate. And I can remember adolescence being a really difficult time for me. And so it was always joyful to see the students because they would be mad at each other one day and the next day it's like they forgot about it.
I think a memory that still makes me laugh a little is the fact that my math teacher in freshman year in Ottawa, he excused me from being late, a few minutes late, me and my friend, as long as we brought him some breakfast, over to his classroom.
One of my laughable memories is, again, my second grade teacher, she used to come in with this dashiki on looking like Queen Latifah all the time and things of that nature. So I always got that vivid memory of her walking through like Queen Latifah, if those of you know who she is, and her dashikis and just comfortable in what she does. So.
I have two. The first one is when my friends and I would give the food that we couldn't really tell what it was, different names. So we were like, what is this? And it was like a chicken ball. It didn't make any sense. And my other was with Miss Bell. She was my 5th grade, or actually my 6th grade. No, she was my teacher for 2 years. And I just thought it was so funny that so many people were scared of her. They thought she was so strict, but she was actually super dope. And I always got along with her. But I just think it's so funny how people were so intimidated by her, but you could tell that she just wanted her students to do really well and had high standards for them. So I thought that was cool.
For me, it doesn't make me chuckle, but it makes me really happy thinking about. I was at a birthday party for one of my family, and it was in the neighborhood of Southwest. So we all, some of the kids, we all go over to the playground, and there's already a bunch of kids already playing the playground. And it just made me really happy seeing everyone. They were different, some of them probably didn't even know each other, but they were all playing together, playing tag, playing the monkey bars. It's really nice seeing that, seeing the joy on a kid's face, just playing together, regardless of differences.
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of the panelists and our moderator for their contributions today, and I'm sure our audience would also like to thank them for their contributions. So, yes. And now we have the time for questions, comments, memories maybe you'd like to share from your school experience. I imagine we have some people here who went to GRPS in different years. So you might have something you'd like to share as well. As I said before, it's great if you can let me know that you want to speak so I can come around and you can talk into the mic. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. My name's Kyle Lim. I have a two-part question, one for kind of our OGs and then one for our current students and more recent grads. Leanne had mentioned this idea, this theme of schools as a site and space of community and how that might have been changing over time. So for my kind of OGs, I'm curious, as you all have witnessed schools in the last 20, 30 years, do you still feel like they're community spaces? Jermar, you mentioned you're still mentoring students currently. Dr. Usasi, you mentioned, you've got grandkids and you're still involved in those kinds of ways. So that's my first part of my question. Do y'all feel like schools are still kind of these community spaces? And if you're able to speak to it, like how this shift towards really pushing school choice even within Grand Rapids Public Schools might have influenced schools being those community spaces. And my question for my current students is, you all talk about this sense of stigma between schools, and Michael, even between like Wyoming and Grand Rapids, maybe sometimes. And my question is, what do you think this system of good schools versus bad schools does to your peer relationships? Like, how does that shape how you show up with your peers when you think about what schools they go to?
So when I went to Hall Elementary in the late 80s, there was not a lot in the neighborhood. There was gang activity. It was just very different. And so there was this whole process of neighborhood renewal. So really what it involved was the community needing to come together. So we had partners with the neighborhood association, with the police department, with different partners. And so the idea was to really strengthen the community. There was no really businesses in Granville Avenue at the time other than one neighborhood store. If you drive through the Granville area corridor now, the results of that work has changed. They just repaired Granville Avenue. The street was paved. There are businesses there. There's restaurants. You can do most of the business you need to do. I think that I'm not sure if the bank was still open there. There's a gas station nearby, but when I started working there was really not much there. And I think a lot of it became, because there was efforts, there was a lot of people in the community that wanted to do things for school. And I think through a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnerships, we were very instrumental in getting the library, the parents, the parent groups became very active. They went to the Board of Education and they said, our school is too small, so the facilities office was able to build a brand new school for Cesar Chavez. It's still not what they need, but parents became empowered, community became empowered, and some changes did take place. But I'm still invested in the community. Like I said, my children went to GRPS and my granddaughter is there currently. So yeah, I believe that the students always did good in the neighborhood, but it was interesting. Once they transferred and started going to Westwood, that's when I started to see some problems, but it was because they were not in their neighborhood and they did not feel like they were part of that community.
I somewhat agree. Again, I believe certain schools, and for example, Alger Middle School, we have a lot of young men of color, African American young men and women who goes to Alger Middle School, and so these are what we call inner city in the 4950 sector area, who are trouble going into the Alger Heights community, going to a school that was designed for that neighborhood, which where a lot of at-risk youth don't live in, and so I don't believe it is more community because within that area, the parents really can't lean on that support. You know, you got to catch the bus or drop your kids off miles and miles and miles away to where it is not as community based. Those children don't come from that sector of that neighborhood to where they're being taught. So again, I believe it's wavering. It's kind of difficult because today's ways of teaching and how GRPS is functioning from back then, when you had that support. You know, so you had different organizations. You had, if the parents was lacking, you had even support for the parents at the time, you know, to help in that support with that child. And so you had parents more using their voice more because you had that proper support. But if you use your voice today as a parent, you're scared of CPS or you're scared of somebody being involved, of you taking accountability for your child, lack of education. And so now I believe it's more targeting the parents in fear of really taking that accountability and walking through those steps of the youth today. And so that's just my experience on the young men and women who I choose to mentor. Did I answer your question?
And then GRPS did invest in City Middle High, right in Cesar Chavez and Rumsey, because the family said, we don't want our students, if they live in the Granville neighborhood or Cesar Chavez neighborhood, to be bused to Union, which is far away. They're close to home, they're close to their families, and so we've seen that there has been a lot of interest in that community.
And sadly, like you said, you don't see a lot of black students inside the city, and you hear him saying the Latinos stood up and used their voice, and unfortunately, we're not going down to the Grand Rapids Public School Board, us blacks, and utilizing our voices. We tend to give up too much and not follow up on paperwork and together. I believe we traumatized by one another to where we don't want to use our voice and support one another. We want to tear each other down in competition to fit in. It's just sad to say, but I challenge our people to do what you do. You go down there, you got to make good noise by going to GRPS and using your voice, taking those proper steps instead of just ranting and raving like we like to tend to do without no follow through.
And I'm sorry, and that's interesting because there is a legacy of, you know, Black activism and protest in Grand Rapids, and it's located in GRPS's history with, you know, the mustache saga that Betsaida was talking about in 1966. And so another question that comes to my mind is, so, you know, what's changed? What's happened? But we're not going to be able to answer that today. But so, yeah.
I mean, I think you bring up a interesting point of sort of like advocacy, and also sort of speaking up now is different. And I would say also sort of like the way that our, you know, district is set up is there is that separation of what's going on in schools and who are the people that can control that environment, and what are the larger decisions that are being made that are not visible, that are not, you don't even know the person who's running like the budget, which is one of the most critical parts of our schools, to see their investments in and sort of seeing it as like a moral document, you know, where are they saying that their values lie to invest into that. And so, yes, like, I think that it's so critical to have, I think like speaking from my experience, I think that speaks to like how people want to get involved and people have things to say, and also how do we facilitate that and bring forward more of that community sort of support, and also what are we willing to speak up on and how are we willing to do that in a disruptive manner. Because I think of folks that go to school board meetings and, like you said, are nervous about sort of retaliation or sort of not, or maybe don't always see sort of an outcome from it, or it's a very slow process. And so I think that happens, even when I went to Wyoming Public Schools budget hearing, also seeing no one there as well, and kind of how are our schools structured to kind of keep, though, that culture and that power in that place as well, I think is an interesting question. In terms of goods and bad schools, I think about sort of when I was switching over to Innovation Central and some of my parents' concern of what they heard about the school. But I think that also reflects on like the school culture, when I switched over, when I went to City High School, a lot of the first impressions when I told people that was, you must be very smart, and just like that automatic trust that I got from them, even as a student of a color, there was some sort of privilege that came with that. But when I switched over to Innovation Central, it was there's a lot of like, resource officers. There was also a lot of hall sweeps, which actually came up in our group discussion. Students from City Middle High found out that still Union High School, Innovation Central, and these other high schools practice hall sweeps where what it is, it's like they'll choose a passing time. So between like 4th and 5th hour, for example. And if they see you in the hall, they'll give you a detention, or, they'll like tell you to get to your class. And when students at City High School found that out, they're like, wait, first of all, what is that? And second of all, like, how are we in the same district and having these different experiences? And so I think that's to say, like, the divisiveness that comes with sort of the good and bad schools really also takes away from the fact that we ate the same school lunch and we still can't tell what's on the plate, and we're getting expired sort of like milk or something like that. And so I think that it's so critical to and I think this is why, the space like SALT, not because it is SALT, but what it represents in the space that it's for, is so critical for students to see like these similar challenges and understand, their narratives and be present, active participants in that and shaping their school experiences. And even amongst out of school like districts, you're still a public school and we're still facing cuts to the public school funding. There's still vouchers that are out to get everyone. And we're seeing this disinvestment in our people are, also asking, why are public schools failing us, but don't see the historical disinvestment that's happening and the $4.5 billion that are needed to bring our schools to where they're at. And also, I think the opportunity to reimagine our schools. How are all of our public schools working with our families, with our students, with our teachers to co-create what it can be and to hold accountability with each other? So if there is someone who's experiencing injustices in our school system, because it can be a site of harm, what are the measures of accountability there to repair, that relationship, to repair sort of those values? And so I think that that's still a conversation that I see coming up with good and bad schools. But I think that there's some people that have momentum over kind of trying to dispel that narrative and focus on sort of the bigger issues that are at large with, not only public schools, but with our identities and who we are as people.
So I know the move to restorative practices versus out-of-school suspension is making a difference because they were really looking at suspension rates in all of the schools. The dress codes have been modified. I know City used to be into the Gothic look, but we had to check kids every day. They couldn't wear caps, they couldn't wear jackets, they had to dress a certain way. So some of that has been relaxed now. So when I go into schools, I see students that seem happier. The students shared that. They said, we don't want a dress code, even though the district was really pushing it. And so there are some small changes taking place to kind of build that engagement and to really get to understand student perspectives.
I think what's really interesting is that although we can put like a superficial label of like what's a good school to a bad school, it's all deeply rooted back to the past. Like from my perspective as a Wyoming high school student, we always labeled City High School as this smart school, as this good school in comparison to this bad Union High School. It's like a cacophony saying Union coming out. And even competitiveness like in sports, always like, oh, Union, light work, or Ottawa, light work. And I think it's just very interesting seeing that these things go back a long time and they still affect us today. In sports too, especially with like how do we show up for each other with Wyoming and let's say GRPS. Especially I think sports is where we mainly interact. Like tennis and wrestling is what I mainly do. In wrestling, we've had a time where my team was cheering for Union. Like we're always, even when we went to meets, it's always Union and Wyoming together. Because we're the people of color. We're going to these conferences where all schools are PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and like, let's say like Catholic Central, for example, it's always going to be. Say we go to a wrestling meet or it's Catholic Central, it's going to be Union and Wyoming cheering together.
I think student engagement, like Jermar said, it's improving a little bit, where teachers are really taking the time to get to know their students. I think that's what you said was one of the biggest things that would help a student succeed, is when the teacher really took time to get to know them and understand them and learn about them. That will make a huge difference.
Okay, thank you all. I want to see if there's more audience questions or comments. Just a second. Got two people. Yes. All right.
Hello, I am newer to the district. I came from out of state and my children attended the school, so I was very unaware of the school choice. I grew up thinking that the public schools were the only option. My kids went to a neighborhood school on the southeast side, and when the middle school process started, I was very overwhelmed, and it was a huge learning curve. And I've been doing a lot more research into that and learned regarding the 4 tests in schools that they did used to save spots, the 2 spots that you spoke about. And I'm wondering when that changed, because I've been gathering a lot of information, and the southeast side is definitely not represented at city and the test in schools. And a lot of those families are unaware of the process, how they apply. So I'm just wondering kind of when that changed and more of that history, if you know about it.
I know there's a process, and GRPS usually makes the community aware of that. I know there's different ways they communicate that to parents. I haven't been in the district for a number of years, but I do know that when my granddaughter started preschool, we had to do it was challenging. If you don't have the knowledge on how to navigate the system, then you're going to struggle, because there's deadlines you have to meet. You have to apply by a certain day. And I know for preschool especially, there's different guidelines for preschool, and you really need to know the system. I happen to know people in GRPS. I made phone calls, and I was able to secure the placement that I needed for my granddaughter, but I know not everybody has that ability to do so. So yeah, you do need to check in and talk to somebody and say, what is the process I need to follow?
So from what I know, city and a lot of schools stopped doing testing for students to get accepted into the schools about 10 years ago. Do not quote me on that. My physics teacher told me that. He's a little old. And from what I've seen my mom do in the dining room for her 4 kids, it's she goes through all of us, and then she picks the schools. And then I'm sitting next to her translating everything, and she's really stressed about all the options and all the things that you have to do and all the paperwork that you have to fill in. So it is a really stressful situation, or I don't know how to say this, but management probably is the best word. So I do not have a tip for you to oh, it's better to do it this way or this way, because I think it's a very tricky system, especially for so people that don't know don't have to know, right? So if you don't know, then you don't know, and if you know, then you know. But I think that it's made that way so people that have smart parents or workful parents that want them to have a big future, like get into those schools. And for me, it was really hard to like translate everything for my mom when we first got here because I barely knew English and she didn't know English at all. So it was me helping her translate important paperwork for like a whole year for our schools. And I was really scared I was gonna mess it up, but I hope, like, luckily I didn't. It is a really hard thing to do, especially when you have more than one or two kids. So I wish you luck.
And I think we have our final question, and then I have one question myself too.
I actually don't have a question, I have a comment. I just want to say, if this is our future, bravo.
Thank you. I think so too. That was a short comment, but awesome one. So I do think if there's one more audience question, I could fit something in, or I have a question too. So yes, okay.
So just real quick, what do you think the impact of the fact that in 1994 there were 28,000 students in GRPS, and today there are less than 14,000 students? So the size of the student population has dropped by 50% plus in that 30-year period. What kind of impact that's had on the function of the schools, and how does it affect the sort of concentration of high-need students in the system, and how does that impact the sort of culture of the school? If anybody has any comments about that information.
Okay, I know for the Latino population, like we talked about how families didn't always want their students bused, so we saw an increase in students and families moving into Wyoming, the Godfrey Lee district. And if you look at those districts now, they have a higher concentration of Latino students and students of color, whereas in the 60s, Wyoming did not look like that, neither did Godfrey Lee. The charters came knocking. And charters were interesting because when I worked, the charters recruited, and parents would get frustrated maybe with policies or staff or whatever challenge they had in neighborhood schools and go to a charter school. The thing is, what the charters did, which they don't do anymore, is if you got in trouble, they would say, well, if you leave quietly, we're not going to suspend you. And so we had families kind of checking out charter schools thinking that that was going to be the answer. And some students were even removed out of special education programs, and so there was a lot. But charters became an option, and so GRPS, that was a challenge. We were not the only game in town, and so we started competing with charter schools that don't have that bureaucracy because they just have their own board, and each school is their own entity. And so you don't necessarily have that, like you say, that confusion that you see with a large district to navigate the district. It's just a lot harder. But they tended to be much more selective, and I don't know. I'm not as familiar with charter schools. I can't speak on that 100%.
I second that. Also, within the 49507 area codes, before I get to that, high schools also are now consolidated. You don't have Creston, you don't have different high schools that we had or different middle schools that we had. Again, charter schools came on the scene. They began to consolidate because of the competition and changing the district from, class A, class Bs, and these different districts or whatnot. And also, I believe a lot of the African-American community has been pushed out towards the Wyoming to Kent Woods, to where they're now are forced to go to those schools instead of GRPS public schools.
I think GRPS was trying to not have families leave the district, so that's when the schools of choice started, the specialty schools. It was kind of like, let's kind of hook people in. And, I went to a high school where there was a mixture of students. We had average students, we had talented students, we had students that struggled. And I think in a school, it's just good to have that blend of students versus just saying, we only have, and I'm not knocking City High School, but they've kind of taken all the talent from the district and put it in one place. And so everybody's competing to get there. And you see that across districts. There's dual immersion programs in Jenison where people, they stay out overnight because they want to get to that program. But I think when the city schools were stronger, they were welcoming or available to all families. And they did have a culture, South High School. You know, it was known at Central High School, Union High School. In the day, they, you know, had very good reputations for solid preparation. Not without challenges. Students were excluded. There were kids that just dropped out of school back then because there were factory jobs they could get. So it wasn't perfect either. But it just seemed like that kind of school worked for more students at the time.
From what I know, a lot of like schools changed like their population. For example, in Ottawa, they don't use half of the school. There is a half of the school that they don't use because there's not enough students to use it. So it's used for SATs, for testings, for other things, but not for teaching. And in city, there is a lack of classrooms. There is like 2 or 3 classrooms to spare, and they are used also for testing. But because in city, the concentration of students is so large, I think it's around 1,000 or something like that. And when I was in Ottawa, I think it was like 600 students. And you knew everybody. In city, you don't know half of the people or more than half of the people. I think that's like a big thing that the buildings are not being used enough. And I've seen GRPS is constructing more buildings, which I generally wonder how they're thinking to fill those buildings up, because some of their buildings are not even half full, or like there are not enough students to use the whole school. So how are they planning on filling up these new buildings?
Westwood Middle was a school of 800 students back in when I started in 1997. 400 seventh graders, 400 eighth graders. It probably has about 150 or less than 200 students today, and it is one of the schools that is slated to close within the next couple of years. There were a lot of neighborhood schools there, but Grand Rapids also decided to put 6th grade into the middle school, which made sense at the time because, you know, you'd have certified math teachers, science teachers, social studies teachers teaching their content versus just self-contained classrooms in the 6th grade. And the public was not in favor 100%, but we said, hey, there's music, there's orchestra, there's other kinds of things. So we tried it. That may have been a factor, but then the charters also continue to increase and draw families.
Yeah, I think a plus one to sort of like the charter schools and some of the language around vouchers as well. I also think about sort of like the culture and like the feel of the schools, how people feel there, and, you know, working with sort of families currently and with students and with other folks, like it's sort of like the sense of belonging and sort of how do we feel in our schools and what is like the buy-in and the co-creation opportunities. And I think that's so important. Like sometimes we come to the same conclusions, but the practice is so critical. Like I think we all want better school lunches, right? So what is a practice of students leading that work and also having buy-in and understanding sort of like the path of decisions that get made with that, sort of enabling folks' creativity. And I've just seen and have heard and met people who have left the district because of the need for more responsiveness, communication, and also acknowledgement of, you know, let's name what's happening and let's commit sort of a plan and metrics to really enforce that. And how do we bring people into those conversations? And so I think that sometimes folks want to be a lot more involved and have the opportunity to co-create, but it's so critical for, as we share like a similar goal for our schools and those community spaces, how are we enabling people to have that same amount of shared or a greater sense of shared power in those spaces to co-create. And I think sometimes for some people, it's just too much to continue to try to ask for. And I think there are some people that try, you know, to respond to that, but it's sort of like the processes in place and communities in place to like continue to enable that as well. And I also think with like special education, my brother is currently in one of their classes, but he has Down syndrome, so sort of his needs are different as well. And so I think of his friends, and his friend had to leave the district because there wasn't sort of resources or the process was just very unclear and very under-resourced and under-supported. And sort of when people bring these challenges up, what are the ways that they're called into the conversation to make those decisions and changes? Because we're working towards a similar goal of trying to see these spaces thrive. Even given the limited resources, there's an opportunity for creativity there, and there is a budget and funds for it as well. And so I think yes to like these other external sort of challenges happening, but also the internal culture and structure. Like, how does that allow for people to work with the district collaboratively and push some of these things forward?
So we're actually kind of at time. And I think some people didn't get to weigh in on this last question. So I just wanted to raise the fact that we're a little bit at time, and I want to have Mike and Carmen, you guys didn't get to go in. So I want to give you the last word here, which I think is appropriate, but be aware of the time. Thank you.
I'm not too knowledgeable about the subject, but I am aware for my own districts, especially like as you were saying back in the 60s when Wyoming and Godfrey Lee were first founded. Well, it's like the names were all different. It was all a bunch of things. It was mainly a large white population, a large, like you'll look at the photos and all the awards, it's all white people. And I do think, yeah, in the 90s, just a huge boom of Latino and Black people. And I think that's amazing, yeah. What's not amazing is the fact that they were pushed out from Grand Rapids. That's not good. But I'm glad that we were able to cultivate and find our own culture together.
I think sometimes the education that Grand Rapids offers is not what people need or what people are looking for. So Grand Rapids is looking to make that space bigger, but it's not giving the space that the parents or the kids actually need. And they just are not gonna go into Grand Rapids again because they know that they are not gonna get what they need or what they want.
Okay. Thank you both. You did an excellent representation of brief comments. Thank you. And we are at time. And so I want to make sure that we all give our panelists and our moderator another thanks. Round of applause for their excellent contributions here tonight. And for their participation. And I do want to also extend the invitation to all of you. We are having a dinner right after this in this space out here in the lobby area, and everyone is welcome to join us. And maybe if we have some unanswered questions and topics that we didn't quite get to, there'll be time for that discussion over dinner. And then I would love to ask you to reconvene with us here at 6 for our keynote presentation by Dr. Annalisa Cox. And so I want to thank all of you for coming here today as well, and look forward to discussing this topic with you more. Thank you.